Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forgotten Generation podcast, hosted by Troy Njenje Mbanga. This podcast is about amplifying young people's voices and the journeys they're on. And today's episode is a National Youth Strategy Special Part 2. As last year, we had an episode in April, so if you haven't listened to that episode, go give it a listen before this one. And I'm pleased to have Georgina back in this episode, and we have Millie. And would you guys like to introduce yourselves? And we'll start with Millie first.
Hi, I'm Millie. I was National Youth Collaborator for the region of Yorkshire and the Humber, and I'm an IWIL Ambassador. I have been since 2022. I've been on Troy's show before, but my social action focuses on mental health and youth services, as well as education, so youth strategy is obviously really relevant to my work.
Thank you so much. And Georgina?
Hi everyone, I'm Georgina. Like Millie, I was a National Youth Collaborator with the IWIL movement, but I was representing the South East region. So a little bit about me. I am also an IWIL Ambassador, and I've been an IWIL Ambassador since 2023. I'm also do quite a lot of advocacy work for young people, whether that's kind of in the youth centre sphere, so looking at uniformed youth organisations, but also with student paramedics. I'm also a creative, so I absolutely love photography, and I do have a podcast of my own. I think this is a very nice group of people here today. We've got a lovely mix.
I absolutely love those introductions. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely be linking Georgina's pod in the description of this episode, so you can have a listen. And so the National Youth Strategy, and for those who don't know the National Youth Strategy, it was introduced to outline the government's commitment to addressing the needs and priorities for young people. And the first question of this episode is, what's one thing that inspires you to make a change and to have a voice locally and also nationally? Millie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think on terms of a local level, definitely community is a big one. I've been involved in lots of local projects where I've really seen the difference communities can make. And so I think obviously the National Youth Strategy was really important in relation to community, because it was about creating different communities and talking to the communities and finding out what their young people needed, as well as on a local level. Obviously, the strategy was more national, and I think just my own personal experience of being involved on a national level and breaking down the barriers that stop young people from reaching their full potential. I think having young people involved and heard and at the table is really important. And so, yeah, I think that's what inspires me nationally on a national level, but locally it's definitely more about community and connecting people on that level.
I love that. Thank you. And Georgina?
I agree with Millie there, absolutely. That community and connection is so important. I think for me, it's about being present in people's lives. So I think in all of the different spaces that I'm in, we think of advocacy or being an activist as something quite fixed, but I think it's a lot more fluid than people imagine. And it's looking at how one action can make that reaction. So I think for me, it's looking at how, when looking nationally, how policy decisions land on individuals, not just on paper. And I think reflecting back on this strategy, it's really interesting to see that even small kind of relational actions. So when we were at the hack events or influencing the Deliver You campaign, the survey, even them small kind of little actions actually made a big impact. And I think it's all about that ripple effect. So it's not necessarily about my voice, but it's using my voice to speak with others and connect experiences to decision makers. And I think kind of following on from that, using lived experience and incorporating that into the process, whether that is at a really local level, creating them connections, creating that community, or nationally where we're building bridges between communities. It's looking at how we can be more human and create systems that work for people, not just working with people.
Yes, I absolutely love what you said, Georgina, about, working with people, and just, yes, that sense of community. And absolutely right so. And I just thank you and Millie for saying that. And so what inspired you to be a youth and collaborator in the first place? to be part of a national youth strategy? And why did you want to do it? And Georgina, we'll start with you.
I'm not going to lie, I applied on a bit of a whim. I saw a message come out and I thought that looks really fun and interesting. I've got no background in policy. I've got no background in kind of government strategy. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. And at that point in time, I was really struggling with my experience as an I Will ambassador. I hadn't quite found my community within the I Will movement. I think the I Will movement's great because it's a collection of lots of young people and we'll meet each other in passing. But actually to be a part of a project is what I really wanted. I wanted to form that group around me of like-minded people who are really passionate about just youth stuff and kind of doing the right thing. And I think why I applied for the National Youth Strategy. So as a student paramedic, I see a lot of people in their communities and I see the difference in communities. So where I am down in Sussex, you have a vast range of people from kind of the vibrant cities like Brighton, but also to the rural countryside area. And being in a coastal community, it's really different. So I grew up just outside of London. So even the contrast to where I grew up to where I am now is massive. And I think that's something that I really wanted to reflect on and share and bring that kind of healthcare and lived experience lens into a conversation that feels quite abstract. And I think where the National Youth Strategy, right from the beginning, was this brilliant thing. It was this abstract strategy and no one quite knew what it looked like or what the final result was going to be. I really enjoyed that because I didn't really know what my journey was and I didn't really know what I could bring to the table. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's see where it ends up. And I'm so glad I did. The community that I've made and the friends that I've made have meant the world. Like, yes, it was for the strategy, but as a result of it, I've had the most amazing experience.
Oh, I love hearing that. But thanks for sharing. And Millie, what about yourself?
Yeah, similarly to Georgina, I hadn't actually had any policy experience either, and I did apply sort of on a whim, as she said as well. I think when I saw that I had the chance to obviously apply, I was quite excited about the idea that I Will ambassadors were allowed to sort of make that impact on a national level. It's not something I'd seen before. And I think also the opportunity to take on a national policy and in theory shift the decision making towards young people and towards local communities was really unique. It's something that we hadn't had before. I think they said that we hadn't had a youth strategy since before the iPhone, which is insane. So being able to have a seat at the table, particularly for Yorkshire and the Humber, and just kind of the chance to also like have that experience of policy level work, because obviously I'm still quite young, I'm 17, I still haven't applied to uni, so I'm still like kind of searching for my calling, I suppose, and I think that was a really valuable insight into that sort of work and what that involved. But also just the fact that young people have obviously always consistently said that they really value not just being involved, but also being at the table instead of just being spoken about, especially in policies that are youth policies and obviously are going to directly influence us. So I think that's a core reason that the youth collaborators were established. And I think one of the main reasons I wanted to be a youth collaborator was because I wanted to make sure the voices that were often not heard or were overlooked were really platformed. And I think that we managed to do that to the best of our abilities. And it was nice to be able to bring the regional aspect in as well and talk from a rural perspective. Obviously Yorkshire, I live on a farm, and then from a more economically area with Middlesbrough, where I go to school and things, I think they're areas that are often not focused on, with them being not obviously big cities, and so to be able to platform those voices was also really important. And like Georgina said, the experience was just unreal, and the people that I've sort of built relationships with in the youth collaborator group are probably going to be friends I have for life. So that was probably, I think, one of my best personal outcomes. But of course, working on the strategy, yes, was very important.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Millie. I think it's just like a family unit that like you all had, and you all kind of work together. and in so many different ways, because as part of our will, like, because we kind of see each other here and there, but when you're part of a group that's so tight and trying to go in the same goal, I think it's so beautiful. And that sense of community, and like Georgina said earlier, and it's just so lovely to hear that. And so what are the three and takeaways from the National Youth Strategy and that you feel like very much is important to you? Millie, we'll start with you.
That's a really good question. So I think that my first takeaway would probably be actually that government processes are really complex and often quite slow. I know that all the youth collaborators did really struggle with the pace of the things that, obviously, working on such a large strategy, and definitely in our political climate as well at the minute, it was quite hard to work with the pace at which things changed and the differences were made. Obviously, it wasn't just having young people involved who had their education and their own personal things to attend to. It was also the actual systematic pace, which obviously I didn't really expect, but I think that was a really interesting outcome, because just being able to see how government works and the speed at which things happen in government was really insightful. So that was definitely a key takeaway for me. Also, and I think this one's kind of inevitable, but just the fact that there is real value in having young people involved and having youth voice platformed, but also that sometimes participation can be uneven. And so having those regional sort of bubbles and having a collaborator for each region of England was really key to the strategy, because it allowed us to try and get the strategy as widespread as possible. Obviously, we had over 14,000 people, young people involved, which is really incredible. And it was nice to see how not just, as I said before, the big cities were involved, but also we could kind of act as, I suppose, like little megaphones for our regional areas. And even where there was no hack event or no Deliver You sort of campaign event in my area, for example, it was taking the voices of the young people that live near me to those events and being able to platform that, which was really important. And that did really have value, because I think having the strategy launched and being able to see the voices of the people I work and go to school with every day involved was really rewarding, and is obviously really game changing in youth voice and government policy and strategy overall, because that's not something that's happened before. And then again, I think just seeing the main priorities of young people in the report was really interesting, because even though we are constantly sort of asked what we care about and what we want to see from government and things, I think having them all laid out in a clear report and being able to look at each section separately and focus on, you know, mental health or community or career skills, that was really nice. It sort of gives young people more of a platform. That consultation is really key, and I think it is important that the strategy has that ongoing consultation with young people and continues to sort of platform those things that they have brought up, such as obviously the need for safe spaces and an increase in employment and life skill education. And especially for my area, I know transport was a big one. So I think just making sure that young people are engaged with is also a really key takeaway, because that's obviously very important for the sort of national level policy.
Absolutely. I agree on what you just said. I think those are very important. And Georgina?
Yeah, I absolutely love everything you said there, Millie. And I think something that shone through to me, which I've got on my list, is that idea of even when something's imperfect, showing up authentically can mean that something meaningful and hopeful comes out of it. And I feel like throughout the process of the National Youth Strategy, we had our hurdles and our challenges, and we worked around it. We worked as a team, and working with the consortium was brilliant. Within the consortium, we had Savanta, who was the research agency, who worked with us along the whole way and consistently incorporated our thoughts and our best practice into their work. And one of their reflections from our final meeting, where they said it was really interesting that they're going to change their processes as a result of how they've worked with us. And I think it's them reflections. Yes, we built this strategy that will give us hope for the future, but along the way we made these little changes, we made impacts. Like Millie, we didn't have a hack event in the Southeast. We had a democracy cafe put on by My Life, My Say. But I ended up travelling to Bristol to support the Southwest hack. And even though we had young people, the collaborators, travelling around the country to get to these different hack events, we still came together and we still got to share our experiences and network with the young people at these hack events. So that's my first point about that kind of imperfectness, but actually authenticity making it perfect. My second point is about youth voice being a process, not just a tick box. And this gets thrown around quite a bit, but actually seeing it in person and being a part of the process, it was really interesting to see how much kind of listening and engagement matters along the way. And it almost matters as much, or if not more, as what you publish at the end. It's that empowerment within communities, and not only the young people who have already been involved in youth voice, already been involved in decision making, getting involved, but actually creating that accessibility and unlocking the world for more young people to engage with us. Even if they might engage once and never again, that engagement still means something, and it's giving them the skills to see that their voice is bigger than just what they see and that they will make an impact. And my third point is about bridging young people. And I've spoken about this quite geographically already, but actually looking at the gap between young people and decision makers. And that gap is really powerful. When there's a big gap there, it's noticeable. Systems don't work for young people. That's a fact. But actually, by taking intentional accountability and bridging them gaps, bringing people closer together, bringing young people together so they can form teams like this, bringing decision makers together, bringing different teams of young people and decision makers into the same room is so, so important. But it does take that intentional accountability. You can't just do it once and never do it again. It's about consistency and ensuring that these meetings, these interactions, even surface level, hey, how are you? Ensuring that's ingrained into the future, into the policies, to make sure that it's sustainable and it's something that can actually last and matter.
That is so true. I'm interested in what you guys were saying, because I find it so fascinating on the experiences that you went through as a youth on Collaborator, and I think just how those ups and downs, but you still came back on the point of making that difference for young people and really showcasing that, even though if they don't come back again, like you said, Georgina, they still contributed and we still had that voice, which I think is so empowering. And so thank you. And so what are the hopes for the report that was published in December for the National Youth Strategy and for young people across the UK? Millie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I really liked your reflections, Georgina. I think overall, it was a super positive experience. I think my main reflections on how I would like to see the policy sort of integrated into daily life is honestly just, my main point is that I would really like to see that consistency. It was really nice to see that there was a policy that recognises those structural challenges that are faced by young people, and because there hasn't been a strategy like this for so long, to have that in place I think is really a big deal, because now that shifts kind of the dynamics of how policy making works and shows that young people can be involved and that it can work and it's been done, and that then creates that barrier of how can we not involve young people because we've done it before and it's worked. So there's no excuse really now to not have those youth voices involved, which is, I think, a really big takeaway from the strategy, is that it was kind of almost a bit of an experiment really to see how young people's voices could be engaged with and could contribute to national policy. And I think that now that's been done, it's really nice to see how that could be integrated into future policy that will also affect us. Again, the consistency with the goals which the strategy aims to achieve is really important. I've written 3 words down. I've put genuine, consistent and continued. It would be really nice to see sort of genuine outcomes of the strategy and genuine reports back on how it has been integrated, and having that consistently to be able to see the progress of the strategy and how that is affecting young people and their daily lives. There's been some sort of discrepancies when reading the reports that a lot of people have flagged up in terms of funding and in terms of representation. And I think it's really important to highlight that representation is something that I do feel we worked on really well. But definitely in terms of the funding, I think there's a lot of mentions of projects which have funding running for 2 to 3 sort of years cycles. But of course, the strategy is a 10-year vision. So it would be really nice to see some concrete timelines of how the government plans to spend the money that they have for the strategy and have those sort of solidified so we can really see if those deadlines and those targets are met, and the outcome to make sure the outcomes of the strategy are clear and consistent. But of course as well, that does have its complications because things such as, mental health, for example, is more of a cross-government issue to tackle. So obviously these things could take a while, and I think it's important to reflect on the fact that even though it might not bring immediate change, we have made those differences, and the fact that a youth strategy has been created with young people involved in the decision-making process, that really sets the groundwork for future policy and how young people can be involved in that policy, which is really, really important and is something that will last forever. So I think that's probably my key reflection, is that we have that groundwork now.
And exactly, and I think that groundwork is so important, and I really do hope that the government really sticks to what young people has outlined, because I think it's so important. The whole 10-year thing, it's so important that young people have a heart and soul into it, because it's no good of actually doing a youth strategy and then they forget about it halfway through what we promised. And Georgina, what about you?
My hopes for the National Youth Strategy. I think looking in the long run, I really hope that people see it as a framework or as a really good example of what can be possible. Like Millie said about we haven't had a youth strategy in years, and actually looking at it, yes, it's not perfect. It's not a finished magical solution with funding for the whole 10 years, but it's something. It's a starting point. What I really hope is that it doesn't finish with the DCMS. So the Department of Culture, Media and Sport were kind of the link in with the youth collaborators and the iBill movement. They were part of the consortium which put this together. And I really hope that this strategy doesn't finish there. I hope that it has the potential to be ingrained as everyday working for every department. I hope that young people across the UK, it was an England-based strategy, but actually it reflecting on the United Kingdom as a whole. I really hope that there are some key takeaways that everyone can learn and everyone can work together from. But I really hope that young people recognise themselves in it, even if it's a little part of it, even if it's just the price of public transport, even if it's finding a safe green space. I really hope that every young person connects with the strategy in some way. I really hope that decision makers and stakeholders use it as their starting point, that they use the strategy that's grounded in lived experience as a reflection on how they can be better. I hope that they use it as a form of accountability. And ultimately, I hope that it offers hope. I think in this day and age, there is a lot on the news, there's a lot with the government, and it's all really stressful and everything is just so grey. And I think I felt it particularly this last year with everything that's been going on. The National Youth Strategy, looking at the next 10 years, but also reflecting on what's happened with COVID, reflecting on everyday things that young people struggle with. And I really, really hope that this National Youth Strategy can kind of share these voices and make sure that they're heard, but especially for the young people who have felt that they've been not heard and overlooked. And it's a lot of hopes, but you know what? I'm hopeful that we have got a really firm starting point. We've laid some nice concrete and some nice scaffolding. And I hope that there are youth workers, that there are young people, that there are people in government who look at this strategy and feel inspired. Maybe not inspired by the hopes within the strategy, but inspired by the strategy itself and how it's grounded and rooted with young people. And I hope that it's used as something to build something that's even bigger and even better.
I absolutely love what you said, Georgina. I couldn't agree more. So thank you guys so much for sharing that. And so to finish off this episode is, what would be a Forgotten Generation podcast quote and to sum up your journey as a National Youth Strategy collaborator? And Georgina, we'll start with you.
Ooh, I think if I had to sum it up, the National Youth Strategy isn't perfect, and neither was the process, but it's a framework that's built on listening. And for me, being a youth collaborator, it was about turning lived experience into hope and making sure that young people weren't just consulted, but they were centred as well.
Love that. Millie, what about you?
My quote would be that young people have shaped a strategy that matters and created a framework. Youth voice isn't just about being heard, but also having what was said acted upon. And I think that the communities that those spaces where youth voice is involved, the communities that creates are really beautiful and really beneficial to the people that are part of those communities. And so I would like to continue making those communities, please.
Absolutely. I really do hope those communities that you make keep building, and same as you, Georgina, because it's just so beautiful. And just thank you so much for the quotes. I really hope listeners listening to this episode can really and take away on what you said and the experience that you guys took on at the National Youth Strategy as youth collaborators. I think is so incredible, and you should be so proud of yourselves because you did such good work. And the report is out now, and it was published in December, and I'll link the report in the description of this episode so you can give it a read. And also the National Youth Strategy and special part 1 of this pod in the descriptions of the episode as well. But thank you so much guys for coming on today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the podcast episode. This is a Be the Change Media Network production. Please support the podcast by subscribing and rating the podcast. I'd love to hear what you like and what could be better for future episodes. If you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram and iwill.troy, and also on X, iwill_Troy. Tune in to next week's episode.